Hello everyone, welcome back to the Anatomy Lab. Today we're going to be taking a look at the floor of the cranium, as in like the bones that you'll be able to see as you look down into the cranium, which is where the brain is going to be resting. So as a reminder, the cranium is this entire portion, which would be including all of these portions that are going to be surrounding the brain. But if you look closely inside of here, we have quite a few specific structures that we need to be able to find as well. So first of all, to orient ourselves, this is the foramen magnum, meaning that this is the occipital bone, and this is the posterior side, while this would be the front of the skull with the frontal bone, the anterior side. So given that this is the frontal bone, this is the anterior cranial fossa, and you can see that you have these spaces inside of here. These are the frontal sinuses. But as we move posteriorly, we can see that we have a specific bone right here. This bone is called the ethmoid bone. So the ethmoid bone is going to have some specific things here as well, which if you look closely, you have these tiny little spaces inside of here. One of them is kind of broken, but all of these spaces are going to be going through this kind of plate of bone tissue. This is called the cribriform plate. And then the holes themselves are going to be called olfactory foramina. So you have the bone or the plate of bone, the cribriform plate, and then the olfactory foramina going through it. But also, if you look from this angle, you might be able to see a little bit better that you have this thing that kind of extends superiorly out of here, kind of like a fin. This is called the cristogalli. Now there is something that is going to be inferior to that ethmoid bone or to that cribriform plate, but it's honestly a little bit hard to see from this view. This is going to be called the perpendicular plate, which would be extending inferiorly to help with making up the nasal septum. Now besides that, posterior to the frontal bone, this is where then we're going to find this kind of next bone here. This will be the sphenoid bone. The sphenoid bone will have a variety of different things as well, such as these two kind of levels, like you have the upper level as well as the lower level. The upper level is called the lesser wings, while the lower level is called the greater wings. So not just name for where they are, but also name for their shape and size. The lesser wings are going to be above and smaller, while the greater wings will be lower and larger. Now something that you'll be able to see here as well is that between the lesser and greater wings you have this kind of space here. This is called the superior orbital fissure. So you can see the superior orbital fissure from this view as well. This would be the superior orbital fissure right here, between the lesser wing up here and the greater wing down here. Now furthermore, the sphenoid bone has a couple of other things as well. You can see that you have this hole right here. This hole would be going to the other side of the orbit as well. And you can see that right there. This is called the optic canal. So this is where a certain nerve is going to be moving through it, the optic cranial nerve number 2, in order for it to reach the eye so that it could transmit ocular signals. Now in here, this is where you're going to have this kind of U-shaped kind of divot or kind of depression that is going to allow the pituitary gland to sit into it. This is called the sella turcica. Now one or a couple more things that you'll be able to see here will include a couple more holes, such as the foramen rotundum, as well as the foramen ovale and foramen spinosum. So we'll have more of an in-depth look at looking at the foramina a little bit later, but for now let's move on to the next bones. So given that this is the sphenoid bone, posterior to the sphenoid bone you then get to this bone. So this bone is going to be continuous with this bone over here on the side of the skull. This would be the temporal bone, meaning that this would also be part of the temporal bone. Now the temporal bone will have a couple of parts. That is going to include the mountainous kind of ridge right here, and then this kind of flat, skinny portion up here. The portion up here, the flat, skinny portion, would be called the squamous portion, while this portion right here that you can see is kind of raised, this would be the petrous portion. So this part is much more simple. this part actually has quite a few structures that are going to be related to it as well. So first, over on this side, you can see that you have this hole that's going in this kind of slanted direction here. This is called the carotid canal. And then over here, this is called the internal acoustic meatus. So inside of the petrous region, that's where you're going to have a variety of different internal, like inner ear structures. But we'll talk more about that when we get to the special senses and nervous system. Now, the last major bone that we're going to take a look at for this video is the occipital bone. If you look all the way back here, like posterior to the temporal bone, posterior to like the temporal mountains, this is the occipital bone, including this large hole called the foramen magnum. So this is the occipital bone, and from the inside, there isn't a whole lot that we're going to be taking a look at, but you can see the foramen magnum. But furthermore, from this direction, it's a little hard to see, but right here, there's a hole. This is called the hypoglossal canal. So this is going to be the cranial floor, which will include like some major bones, the frontal bone, the temporal bone, the sphenoid bone, ethmoid bone, and occipital bone, as well as their specific landmarks. So we're going to be taking a look at some other structures a little bit later, either from the bottom of the skull or more of a focus on the foramina, so don't worry, but take a look at those videos if you haven't gotten a chance quite yet. But for now, I think that's it for today. Thanks for listening, good luck with your studying, and I'll talk to you all soon.